today for purposes of a dispositional review hearing and a permanency plan hearing. May I have the names of our participants, please?
Lee Heiss, lawyer guardian ad litem.
Nastasia Thomas, counsel for the department.
Brittany Stover, foster care worker with the department.
Michael McFarland, representing father, Mr. Orner. Has he joined us, Your Honor?
Do we have Mr. Orner in the meeting? I know we have a Moto G Power. I don't know who that is. Check in with Ms. Stover to discover if she's got any further information on the whereabouts of your client.
I do not. I let him know the court date on 3/7, but I have not had contact with him since.
I just checked the hall, Your Honor. There's nobody in the hall.
All right, and to your knowledge, has he contacted your office?
Well, they would have notified me if he had this morning, and I do not have a notification, Your Honor.
Okay, Ms. Christina Orozco, would you like to give us your name for the record?
Christina Orozco.
All right, Ms. Orozco, Deputy Ames is going to swear you in. I need to have a conversation with you because your attorney's unavailable.
Okay.
Okay, Ms. Orozco, you're not an attorney, and I wouldn't expect you to be an attorney, but we don't have your attorney this morning. She's had an emergency situation come up, and she's not going to be able to join us. So
Okay.
you have the option to proceed without her, but you are entitled to legal counsel. And if you proceed on your own, I mean, I'll give you an opportunity to ask any questions of any witnesses, of course, and to have your opportunity to speak, but you wouldn't have your attorney here to advise you on whether or not that's a good idea, or perhaps which questions would be necessary to ask. And we have a disposition. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. No, I'll wait for her.
Right. So we'll have to. Okay, so I think what we could do though is probably proceed as it relates to your client, Mr. McFarland. He's had notice. So Ms. Orozco. Okay, so you're welcome to stay with us, Ms. Orozco, but as it relates to your case specifically, we'll try not to get into that today. And then of course, you'll be able to listen in on the updates as it relates to Mr. Randall Orner at least, and on the child, and then we'll find some time on another day or find another attorney for you for the piece of the hearing that relates to you. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Ms. Heiss.
Thank you, Your Honor. When you meet these kids in person and look them in the eyes, you can't help but wonder what would be in a parent's life that would lead them to project such a depressing life on someone else. The home that they're in is their grandmother's, and it is a place where I'd like to spend the day. It's a lovely home, lots of relatives, everything a kid needs, and yet these kids have been through so much. A normal teenager who hasn't been through the extreme trauma that these kids have been through, you know, they have friendships and they have drama at school and they have a grade that they don't like and they're trying to change, and they have events coming up and sports teams that they want to join. But when you add these kids' backgrounds, and you know, it's just heartbreaking. These grandparents have stepped up and for 24/7 for 4 kids. They are providing for these children, and it is just, you know, if these parents would agree to make a change and take control of their children's lives and provide for them, this could all turn around. But it is, these folks have done nothing. The agency is asking for a change in goal. I think that there's nothing short of a goal change that I would recommend. You know, the normal things that kids are going through, in addition to the things that these kids bring into life, the addictions that they had, you know, the things that they were used to, that you take it out of a kid's life, and now his body is all set up to do certain things, and now he can't do those things. The little ones are really working hard to be involved in school things and running long distances and all those kinds of things, and they're beautiful children. very well behaved for grandpa and grandma. And aunt and 3 little cousins live there too, and it's a wonderful family, and yet they seem sad. They seem, teenagers can be sulky, but these little kids, in the right environment would have been, head of the class. They would have been expressing their artistic interests and their athletic interests, but they're kind of, missing baseball practice because they're just down and out. Don't feel like asking for more from grandpa and grandma maybe, but the goal needs to change so that these kids can settle in and really get accustomed to their power base and let grandpa and grandma help them. These folks are working people, grandpa and grandma, and yet everything is provided. Parent-teacher conferences, all the sports, the haircuts, the everything's attended to. It's a real miracle that some families have, some kids who have been through this much have family like this to take care of them. Many don't. So I agree with the agency that we need to change the goal. I wish I could do anything to motivate this mother to do better, but we haven't found anything to help her do any better. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Your Honor. If I can call Ms. Stover. Thank you. Ms. Stover, did you prepare a court report for today's hearing?
I did.
And in that court report, there are several attachments. Do you have the one in front of you that you can just briefly review the attachments with us?
I don't have a memo in front of me.
Okay. It looks like it's a bigger report today. It looks like in addition to the court report and the case service plans, there was a police report included,
Yes,
the substance abuse assessment, a letter, the DNA results, the LDC, drug testing results, the parenting class certifications, notes from a family team meeting, and then one of the children's 504 plans. Does that seem accurate?
yes.
Thank you. Your Honor, if I may ask the court and counsel if they've received a copy of this court report and the attachments.
I have
received it and reviewed it. Thank you.
I have by way of exhibits, the case services plans, the pay stubs, parenting certificates, LDC screens, a police report, probation conditions, substance abuse assessment, more LDC screens, and Ms. Moore's recommendation letter. There they are, the DNA results at exhibit 11. And an FTM at 12, 504 plan, and the semi-annual FTM notes, it looks like. Is that
Yes.
right? Thank you for the cover sheets. Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Stover, are there any updates or modifications that need to be made to the court report that you're aware of?
No.
I did have a question. Actually, today we're only going to speak about Mr. Orner's portion of the court report. And at this time, have you had any contact with him other than what's listed in your court report?
No.
And overall, how would you summarize his level of compliance with and benefit from his service plan?
Non-compliant and no benefit.
And in your court report, you indicate that you've had bare minimum communication with him. Is that correct?
Correct.
And at this time, do you believe that there would still be a risk of harm to the children if they were to be put in his care and custody?
Yes.
And can you just briefly state what that risk of harm would be to them?
Substance use, domestic violence, housing instability, physical, emotional abuse.
And the conditions that cause the children to come into care, those have not been addressed by Mr. Orner at all, correct?
No, they have not.
And to the best of your knowledge, when is the last time that Mr. Orner saw his children?
I believe it was 3 years ago or more.
And in your court report, you indicated that you discussed your recommendation for the goal change with Mr. Orner. Was he understanding of what the department was requesting?
He reported he understood and that he did want to work his case service plan. at that time, he did inform me that, but his actions state otherwise.
And has he reached out to inquire about the children's well-being?
No,
And to the best of your knowledge, has he reached out to the foster or to the grandparents in this case at all to inquire about their well-being or offer any support?
no, I do know that he is fine with paying child support, but any other support he has not inquired about or reached out to placement for.
And to the best of your knowledge, is he continuing to pay child support?
To the best of my knowledge, he is.
Have you had the opportunity to discuss with the children the department's recommendation about their permanency?
Yes, in regards to Mr. Orner, yes.
Okay. And what is their opinion?
The children maintain that they don't want a relationship with him and that they don't believe him to be their, they don't want him to be in their life.
And I know earlier in the case, the children, or at least one, did not believe that he was their biological father. Now that the DNA has been submitted and confirms that he is the biological father of all of the children, have you had the opportunity to discuss that with them?
Yes, we spoke with the children about it with Miss Moore at a therapeutic session, and it's been something AYO is continuing to process and work through.
And just to summarize, I'm sorry about that. If you can just remind us the ages of the children.
AYO is 15, AO is now 13, LO is 11, and LYO is 5.
And they're all in need of permanency moving forward. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
Do the children have any unmet needs in their current placement?
No.
And as it relates to Mr. Orner, there have been some updates regarding the substance abuse and whatnot. And to the best of your knowledge, has he begun to address any of those issues?
To my knowledge, he is not.
And is there anything else you'd like to bring to the court's attention today?
Not at this time, no.
And at this time, are you asking the court to change the permanency goal for the children, specifically as it relates to Mr. Orner?
Yes.
And what is the permanency goal you are recommending?
Adoption.
And can you please explain why guardianship would not be appropriate for these children since they are in a relative placement?
Adoption provides more permanency. It's harder to terminate an adoption than it is guardianship. And the grandparents are very supportive with the goal of adoption.
And
they are working with our kinship department, our kinship worker, to become licensed.
And as it relates to the benefits that a relative placement provides children and families, specifically as it relates to Mr. Orner, has there been any advantage of the relative placement in this case?
There's been great advantage to being placed with their relative. They feel comfortable. They feel they've reported to me that this is their only safe space and that they feel comfortable talking with their grandparents about maybe trauma triggers, and grandma and grandpa are very open to talking with them and working through their challenges. Grandma and grandpa support all extracurricular activities. AYO will be starting baseball today. LO is interested in attending a church group. And so they're very supported physically, mentally, educationally at their current placement.
And has Mr. Orner taken advantage or been able to benefit, I guess, from the advantages of that relative placement, such as stopping by on Sundays for dinner or having extra communication with them, anything like that?
Mr. Orner?
Correct.
No, his visitations are suspended, but he has not maintained contact with the placement.
Thank you. If there's nothing else, I would move to admit the court report with the attachments, understanding that as it relates to Ms. Orozco, we will have to come back and revisit this for her. Thank you, Your Honor.
Very good. All right, so we'll adjourn the dispositional review hearing as it relates to you to this Friday, April 14th at 10:30 in the morning.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, Ms. Stover, as it relates to the suspension of parenting time for Mr. Orner specifically, if you could revisit the reasons for that suspension and any support you may have for continued suspension if it's necessary.
Mr. Orner's visits were suspended due to not making progress with his case service plan. He's continued to not make progress and has actually had an incident this reporting period where he was pulled over while intoxicated. And Ms. Moore continues to recommend the suspension of parenting time. So the department supports that as well.
What is the risk of harm specifically to the children if visitation is allowed with their father?
So the children have reported physical and emotional abuse. So physical and emotional abuse. The children don't know Mr. Orner as they haven't seen him in several years. And substance use, drinking.
Thank you. Questions based on my questions, Ms. Thomas?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Counsel?
It sounds as though these issues could be resolved with supervised parenting time at the agency where you would test them for any controlled substances. That would address the concerns you have regarding controlled substances, correct?
To my knowledge, our substance screens don't test for alcohol. And so he would have to do that through LDC. And I'm not sure if that would be possible on a visitation day.
Well, you could explore that, correct?
That could be explored.
And as far as his behavior, if they were supervised, you'd have somebody to monitor that and to terminate visits immediately if there were any concerns, correct?
So when the children completed their trauma assessment, the trauma center recommended that if parenting time were to be explored, they would need to do a bonding assessment. So that's where I would start.
Are there allegations? Oh, sorry, didn't want to interrupt.
Oh, go ahead.
Are there specific allegations of trauma to the children at the hands of my client?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Oh, I do, just one. Do you know what became of the drunk driving offense in January of this year? Was there?
He's on probation.
So there was a conviction or plea to what?
Operating while intoxicated, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further. Your Honor. Well, I guess the other thing is you could go through his probation officer to see if he could do a PBT test prior to a visit. Isn't that something else you could maybe
That's
arrange?
something I could explore.
Nothing further.
Is Mr. Orner aware that his children are in basically foster care?
Yes.
He's aware, is he aware of what the events surrounding them being placed in foster care?
He is aware.
You personally have made him aware?
Yes.
On January 23rd, Mr. Orner was arrested for drunk driving, correct?
Correct.
And he had a blood alcohol of 0.24, something like that, correct?
Yes.
And on January 24th, where were the 4 children?
They were with their relative placement.
So that day, had he provided anything for the children? Food?
No.
Okay. How about his case service plan requires him, what is your plan for him to be drug screening or alcohol screening?
He's supposed to test twice a week with LDC.
And is that a random draw?
Yes.
So every day he has to check to see if his color is called?
Yes.
So every single day he doesn't check or if he checks, he doesn't show up for his screening, correct?
Correct,
And that has been the whole 3 months of this review period.
yes,
And his children have been in foster care every day that he didn't screen, correct?
correct,
They're going to school, they're doing what kids do.
yes,
The children are progressing in counseling with Renee Moore. Would you agree?
I would agree.
Every session, they do something a little bit different, a little bit more open. Is that right?
Yes,
And it's Renee Moore who recommends no visits at this time, correct?
it is, yes.
The oldest boy will be going, the only boy, will be going to a different counselor here in town. Has he started that?
He has.
Okay.
He will still attend sibling therapy with Miss Moore.
And he is also connected with MYOI, whether he's very attentive to it or not, right?
Yes.
Okay, so those resources are there for him. That concludes my questions. Thank you.
Any further redirect or questions, Ms. Thomas?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you for your testimony. May you return to your seat. That's then Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think the significant part is the parenting time with Mr. Orner. As we know, we cannot ask for continued suspension if there's no risk of harm to the children's physical health or significant risk of harm to their mental well-being. And I think that the testimony, and including the previous admitted trauma assessments, indicate that there would be a substantial risk of harm to these children as they have experienced trauma as it relates to Mr. Orner. And Mr. Orner has failed to take any steps to rectify any of the conditions that brought the children into care as it relates to him. And so we request that that continue to be suspended at this time. We also ask that permanency goals relates to the children as a whole and not just Mr. Orner, but we do ask the court to consider that the goal be changed to adoption at this time. Although there are at least 2 of the children would be considered an appropriate age for juvenile guardianship. Specifically as Mr. Orner, there's no benefit that he is utilizing, I suppose, as relates to the relative placement as he continues to be absent from their lives for a significant period of time here. And so we'd ask you to consider that as well and to maintain their placement at this time. Thank you.
Any comments, Mr. McFarland?
I believe the court placed on the record my client was properly served notice of this hearing. So without him being present, I do not know what his position is, so I'll rest at that.
I keep promising myself to be less intense, but these kids are really have suffered. You know, we don't have a whole lot of cases with this much suffering, and for them to be in a healthy, loving environment, it still takes time for all of this to shake through. So this hearing today isn't about Ms. Orozco, but I noticed that she was listening, and I just want to try the experiment of laying it flat out and making sure that somebody hears me say the best thing for these children, although they look really well cared for with grandma, the best thing for these children is for mother to do the case service plan. It's laid out step by step. Ms. Stover is perfectly available, and this goes for Mr. Orner too. Although he's not with us here today, he has had a night of fun. He went to his girlfriend's house and had a .23 driving, which is completely irresponsible, while he was under the influence of alcohol, while these children were what? Fill in the blank. What was all these children, their names are so personal to them, and they're so precious that what were they doing that night? What were they doing without? It's hard to say because grandma, they have great traditions in their family, and I don't mean to say that they're going without, but it would be happier if mom would do what she needs to do. There is no father figure, hasn't been for a long time. So I believe adoption is the appropriate goal.
Court finds all parties were given notice for purposes of today's hearing. Mr. Orner was reminded by Ms. Stover, according to her statement earlier today, of the hearing today. And he has certainly had access, and knows how to contact her, knows how to contact the court. We have his email address. We've been sending copies of the orders to him, and his case service plan is always attached to those, which indicate our next court date. Unfortunately, it does appear he's not making any progress, despite the clear, reasonable efforts that are being made by Ms. Stover to engage him in those services. That's clearly demonstrated by not only her testimony, but the evidence that he was recently arrested for drunk driving, high BAC specifically. In fact, the Dan Master document indicates at one point he blew a 0.04, or I'm sorry, a 0.24. On the roadway, he, according to the PBT, had a 0.20 and it continued going up by the time we got to the police station, clearly indicating he's not benefiting from services and the risks are identical to those that were identified in the initial petition, including that substance abuse concern. He had not seen the children in a significant period of time, has not seen them, and of course, the suspension is part of that, but it should continue. That's supported by the caseworker, the fact that he's had an extended absence even before the suspension was in place, as well as the information in the trauma assessments and the support of Ms. Renee Moore, all indicate that there is a risk of harm to the children, at least in a minimum. Mental health, their mental health needs to be preserved, but there could actually be a risk of physical harm as well, based on the information that was developed out of the trauma assessment. So for those reasons, the parenting time for Mr. Orner will remain suspended pending further proceedings. The children will remain in their placement, their relative placement as well. That's the safest and least restrictive place for them to be at this point. We'll have the review as it relates to Ms. Christina Orozco's progress on Friday the 14th, and we'll of course look at that. But all orders as it relates to the children will remain in full force of effect as it relates to her as well, until Friday, when we can look at the materials and review and have her opportunity to address any concerns she may have. But as of today, the prior order states that her parenting time is also suspended and that the risks are high in allowing the children to return to her care as well. So they will remain with their relative placement that is, again, the safest and least restrictive pending further proceedings. Thank you to Ms. Heiss for her diligence in reviewing the matter for today. I'm going to postpone my ruling as it relates to permanency planning until after I've heard all of the evidence on Friday. So I will say to Ms. Orozco, obviously you've had a signal of what the request will be on Friday. So I would recommend to you that if you wish to prepare any further, that you reach out to your attorney between now and Friday so you can chat with them and be as prepared as possible. And we'll be making that decision on Friday, whether or not the goal should remain reunification or should change to adoption to allow the children to have safety, permanency, and stability moving forward, given the amount of time that they've been in care, which is, just a review, since August 9th of 2022.
What time on Friday, Your Honor?
10:30 in the morning.
I will be here.
Aaron Foot.
Thank you.
Very good. All right. Any preliminaries?
Not for me.
Not here.
Okay, Ms. Heiss.
Thank you, Your Honor. I visited with this child face to face in her home. Generally, the psychological evaluation for the mother is still pending. It's scheduled for like this week. So as much as I want to argue that this case is ready to close, parents have benefited from services, child has been reunified, child is doing well. It seems to me like we should be at closing, but I don't want to interrupt the funding for the psychological evaluation. What I really would like is to have seen a lot of the follow through for following the recommendations of the psychological evaluation. But, you know, we took jurisdiction 8 months ago, maybe. But, you know, removal was in 2021. And I can't remember why we're still at psychological evaluation, but I know the agency will remind me. So my recommendation is that we set another review. However, I believe that we may be able to close in the meantime when mother gets her psychological evaluation report back. If these counselors that she's already seeing, Kat Hancock and the other one, if they have hold of it, mom commits on a safety plan to follow through, I think that we could let them go without services. But, so that's my recommendation. The child's needs are being met in the home. There are 7 children and 2 dogs and 2 adults in a very small home, but I watch it work. I watch it work, and I think the child's in the right place. 2 children are out at school now, so that there are extra eyes on the family and the community. The mother has cooperated with services, benefited from services. The services have benefited from the mom's participation. I mean, she really has a lot of strengths, and father too, keeps working, just like a clock. So I would recommend that we set another review, but I would hope to close in the meantime, but that's just my recommendation. Thank you.
Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. I don't know if I can call Ms. Young. Ms. Young, you are the foster care worker in this matter, correct?
I am, yes.
And you provided a court report for today's hearing.
Yes,
And in the court report, it includes a case service plan and then a referral that was made in February.
that is correct.
And that was for FRP services.
Yes.
And at this time, are there any updates or modifications that you're aware of that need to be made to the court report?
At this time, as Ms. Heiss stated, mom does have her psychological scheduled for this Wednesday, so we were just requesting an early review period so that way we can get that psychological, see if there's any other services that's needed, and look at potentially closing at that review period.
Okay, thank you. And in my review of the court report, I noticed that under mom's portion of the permanency component, subsection 3, that compliance is not noted in any regard under refraining from criminal activity. And then as it relates to father's portion, starting with that corresponding section in letter F, there's no compliance indication on his case service plan components. And so I just wanted to bring that to your attention, but then also ask if all of those should be marked as compliant.
Yes, those should be marked as compliant. That's an error on my end.
And
Apologies.
at this time, the child has been reunified with the parents, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And is there any, what would the risk of harm be if the court were to close the case today?
At this time, the only risk of harm really is if there's any other psychological needs, we wouldn't be able to identify those. Mom, like I said, mom still has her psychological appointment that's scheduled for this week to determine if there's anything further that she's in need of or family's in need of anything. We are wrapping up FRP services hopefully within the next couple of weeks, but at this time, there's no further risk of harm. Minor child is reunified. She's doing very well. She's in services. So at this time, we have no major concerns.
And through the case service plan and in this last review period, your report indicates that the parents have been in full compliance. Or is there anything else that the department can offer these parents at this time?
Not to my knowledge, like I said, if there's anything that was identified in the psychological, that would be the only thing that we would proceed on with. We would make sure that those needs are met. And if there is nothing, then we would look at potentially closing at that time.
And is the family, just as a point of clarification, is the family still participating in IHT?
Yes, I do believe it's more geared around the oldest child, who's not under a jurisdiction.
Okay, and that's something that they're doing on their own or through just an ongoing case?
I believe it's through his probation,
Okay.
some of those requirements.
Wonderful. And the expedited review request is, as you stated, just to get the psychological report back, correct?
Correct, and to finish wrapping up the FRP services, they're doing a phenomenal job. Mom and dad are in compliance with all of that, and it sounds like they have just a few sessions left before they would potentially be closing those services.
It sounds like everything's going really well. So is there anything else you'd like to bring to the court's attention?
At this time, I don't really have anything else. BF, she's in IV rehab services. She was just seen by a pediatrician not too long ago. They determined that she does have symptoms of autism, so she would need further testing for that. And mom and dad have all of that covered. They've got other appointments scheduled. I believe I noted in there too, she does have weekly weight checks just to make sure that she's on track with her weight gain. They're working with a dietitian for her for that. Other than that, I don't really have anything else. Mom and dad are complying, and it's been a pretty quiet review period. They've done very well, and they've been able to manage everything at this point.
Okay, thank you. Your Honor, if we have no further questions of this witness, and would move to admit the court report with.
No objection.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay.
How many total children does this couple have, do the parents have?
7,
And of these, how many are actually in this case?
just the one.
So we have older children, all of them are older, and we have a newborn child, correct? A newer born,
Yes.
newer,
Yes.
younger than the child that's in this case, correct?
That's correct, yes.
None of these have been brought into an NA case, correct?
That's correct.
You have no concerns about the safety of these children, including the newborn, correct?
That's correct.
And it sounds as though there's no risk of harm right now to the one child in this case, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and let's separate, even though they're a married couple, we have two different parents here. Let's separate the father from mother. Father has no requirements to take a psychological right now, correct?
He's already completed his.
Correct, and he's completed all of his goals completely, correct? Why not close the case on him, since there's no risk on him? That's in the report.
I have no objection to that. I mean, if that's what the court wishes to do, then I have no.
Well, I'm asking
No
you,
concerns
since your
with that.
report does not show a risk of harm or anything else further for my client to do, would you support closing it on father?
Yes.
Thank you, nothing further.
I have no questions.
One more, if I might. You are requesting a 45 review, accelerated review in your court report, correct?
Correct.
You're still asking for that today.
I am, yes, just so that way we can satisfy the requirements of the case service plan as far as with mom.
Thank you.
Nice.
I have no questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks.
Ms. Young, why is the psychological so delayed for mother?
There was some hiccups with the previous worker. There was a referral that was done to a different psychological evaluator. And it's my understanding mom did not wish to have that evaluator complete the exam. And we sought out a different provider that she was willing to go through. And it's through the Brain Center of Michigan. And she's scheduled for this Wednesday.
Okay, and then if the judge were to close the case today, would there still be an ongoing caseworker from DHS for this family?
Not if the case closes, no.
So even the other kid that's in a part of delinquency, that doesn't have any ongoing case?
Not with us, no.
And if there were a safety plan in place that this mother is to complete and follow recommendations of her psychological evaluation, that would be less restrictive than keeping all of the case open, correct?
I guess I'm not understanding what you're saying. Just to kind of clarify, if we close our foster care case, we will have no jurisdiction at all over the minor child and ensuring that gets completed. This was a requirement from the very beginning of the case to have the psychological done, and it wasn't done early on. And that's the only thing left for her to complete to satisfy that case service plan.
Right, but we wouldn't want to put all case services consecutively and elongate the case. On the safety plan, it could be monitored by ongoing services, couldn't it?
Not to my knowledge, that would have to be a whole new referral. We wouldn't want to do that if that was not necessary.
Mother's health insurance would cover the psychological without foster care being open.
I'm not sure.
So
Leaving this open while I do this.
it may be that the psychological evaluation shows needs that you want to track for 30, 90 days, several months could be an outcome, correct?
It could potentially, but hopefully with all the services that she has completed, the therapy that she's in, that would help satisfy those needs, in that the evaluator would be able to look at the progress that she's made, based on from when the referral was put in to where she's at now, and be able to satisfy that, as long as she's willing to maintain those needs.
And then are you putting in some of those pieces into the psychological evaluator so they'll know the progress that she's made and the circumstances that brought the child into care?
It's from my understanding, that was all completed with the prior worker. And it was just a matter of getting into the psychological.
Thank you.
Itself.
I have nothing further.
And Ms. Young, when did you take over the management of the services?
February 3rd.
Okay, did you file a DHS 69?
The previous worker, I believe, sent all of that out. If that was not received, I can make sure that that gets in the court file.
Yes, if you could, please. I just checked mine. You could double check to see if it has been done on your end, and maybe you just didn't make it to my file, but I don't, as of today, I don't have it in my file. Thanks.
No problem.
Okay, any redirect, Ms. Thomas?
No, Your Honor, not for Ms. Young, but Your Honor, as it relates to the DH-69, I do have that it was sent by Ms. Fletcher to the court on February 3rd.
Thank you. I will circle back with the clerk's office on that then.
May I call Ms. Foote just for a few questions?
Certainly. Come on up to our witness stand.
Ms. Foote, regarding the psychological evaluation, you have one scheduled
Yes, ma'am, Wednesday,
Wednesday,
8 a.m.
and is it virtual or in person?
virtual.
Okay, and where is that evaluation? Who is the evaluator?
Lynn Payton,
And where is she from?
Burning Center, Michigan.
And is that an agency that you chose for your psychological evaluation?
That is when I requested, yes.
And were you offered a psychological evaluation earlier that you weren't satisfied with the evaluator?
Yes,
Okay, so part of the delay in the psychological evaluation is to get to the right evaluator for you, correct?
correct.
If we didn't have any jurisdiction over you and if your insurance paid, would you be following through with the psychological
Yes,
evaluation?
ma'am.
You understand that you're gonna get recommendations at the end of the evaluation, correct?
Correct.
And is it your intent to follow those recommendations?
Yes, ma'am.
FRP is finishing in your home?
Yes, ma'am. As far as I know, we have tonight and next week. And then they had to go back to Caitlin and see if they could be done.
Is there any other service that is unfinished that I'm not thinking of?
All we have right now through this is FRP.
And then you see a counselor.
Correct.
Is that virtual?
That will be going back to virtual, yes.
Okay. Is that something you intend to continue?
Yes,
It's been helpful.
yes.
And then you meet with Kat Hancock, but that's not for your specific issues, is it?
She does family counseling as well as for Michael.
So parenting, she does address? Is this the BF in daycare?
Yes,
How many hours a week?
20.
And that's at Candyland?
Yeah.
Everything going okay?
Yeah.
Any reports home of diaper rash or any of those things happening?
When she was getting 8 teeth at the same time, she had a diaper rash, but that was 8 teeth at the same time.
Wow, okay, thank you, nothing further.
Any questions for this witness, counselors?
No.
None,
One,
Your Honor.
your insurance, oh, sorry,
I think she said no.
Thank you. I think you indicated that, at least to me, that your insurance would cover the psychological evaluation. Am I correct on that?
Yes, sir.
And your husband's indicated that he would sit in regardless these family reunification 2 meetings that are left, right?
Correct.
Nothing further.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. May you return to your seat? Anyone else you'd like us to hear from? Ms. Hex?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Comments in closing, Ms. Thomas?
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, I believe that an expedited review is appropriate solely to ensure that the continuity of the services and the payment and all of those things just go well to ensure the family has maximized the benefit. And this family has definitely made significant strides since the initial petition was filed, which was a significant amount of time ago. And so we would just request that, and everything indicates that they will continue to follow up with those services. So even if the court determines that jurisdiction is no longer needed, we are confident that the family will be safe and that the child under this court's jurisdiction will continue to thrive in her home. Thank you.
Mr. McFarland?
The standard we're looking at is there a risk of harm to these children? Workers testified there's no risk of harm involving my client. Matter of fact, when asked, she advocated today that we close the case against my client. We've also heard testimony. He's indicated to me also that the last 2 family reunification meetings, he will be present, as he is always, and he will attend those. So no risk of harm. He's completed all of his services. We're asking that his case be closed. Thank you.
Mr. Brooks?
Well, I understand perfectly what the posture of this case is. So before we got in here, while this is going on, I asked my client if she had any problems with this extending long enough to get this psychological done. And she said, no, she had no problem with it. But of course, the elephant in the room before this court is there is no established risk of harm for this child to be in the care of her family. I leave it to the discretion of the court what direction it wants to go.
Ms. Heiss?
I have no comments. Thank you.
Well, the court finds all interested parties were given notice for purposes of today's review hearing. It was also a permanency planning hearing, but clearly there's no reason to dislodge the goal of reunification that will continue to be reflected in today's court order. I do also find that certainly Ms. Young and Ms. Heiss have both satisfied their obligations. We have ample evidence of the reasonable efforts in this case, the monitoring of services, both in her testimony as well as in the documents received by the court today. As previously promised, the court will retain jurisdiction over both parents until the psychological evaluations are completed and the FRP services are completed. There were a number of issues that arose during the trauma assessment indicating that these parents were less than excited, let's put it that way, about services. And given the high needs of their children, as well as the significant and very dangerous situation that brought this child into care, it's of paramount importance that this family benefit and be monitored to ensure they are taking advantage of and benefiting from services. So it will be the order of the court that the family continue to be under the jurisdiction and review of the court for another review period. I do not at this point have time to give you a 45-day review period. So as the court's schedule allows, we will have our next review on July 17th at 10 a.m. You're always welcome to discuss among yourselves, preferably after a team meeting as well, whether or not continued jurisdiction is appropriate. If you wish to, and submit a stipulation for release of jurisdiction to my review, for my review. I know you've utilized that in the past, but please don't bring that to me until the FRP program as well as the psychological is completed and any referrals necessary as a result of that psychological have been completed and we see engagement by the family.
The date and time again, Your Honor?
We'll have our review on July 17th at 10 a.m.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. The child remains placed with the parents. Of course, that is the safest and least restrictive, and I'm glad to hear that you're all doing well. So good luck to you, and we'll see you in July unless I hear something else first.
Thank you.